More than ever, UX designers and researchers have the power to influence design process from the ground up, creating products and experiences that are more usable and accessible than ever. But how can you conduct more inclusive user interviews? This video is a snippet from one of our recent live events, where Vale Querini, CareerFoundry UX design mentor, shares some of the fundamentals of inclusive user interviews. If you're interested in more events like this, check out our events page on CareerFoundry.com. And if you think UX or UI design might be for you, check out our free short courses. The link for those is in the description below. Now, let's dive in.
And today, we're gonna have a webinar on user interviews. As you know, it's gonna be an introduction to user interviews. So I try to keep this as accessible as possible for everyone. I imagine that in the audience here, I have a lot of CareerFoundry students, but also people who are new to UX design, people who are maybe interested in taking the course. So I'll try to really target this audience and keep things simple. I will explain what user interviews are, when it makes sense to use this particular method of research. And I will also tell you a little bit more of the practicalities that come with preparing for a user interview session. So also the logistic, the organization behind, and then how you actually conduct the session. How do you get the insights, which you can do with them afterwards. And because this is also about inclusive design or inclusive research in this case, I will also mention what does it mean to do inclusive research, and how can you make sure that your interviews take the inclusivity perspective into it. And last but not least, at the very end, I want to share a little something about the difference between doing user interviews in person, like face-to-face, and remote. Because I guess that nowadays we're all doing more remote work anyway, so maybe it makes sense to touch upon also like the pros and cons of going fully remote. All right, so I see that we have a message in this chat also from CareerFoundry, so from Jakob, I imagine, that says, probably some connection issues. You can post questions here in the chat. I'm not sure if I'll be able to read everything while I go through my presentation, because I see there are a lot of you and a lot of messages coming up already. But in the end, we will have time for some Q&As, so we can also address some of those. All right. First of all, what are user interviews? User interviews are a UX research method, a user experience research method, during which there is a researcher who is asking questions to a user about a topic, any topic. We can see on this chart here that I have on my slide, this is a chart that I grabbed from the website of the Nielsen Norman Group. And we can see a representation of different research methodologies placed on the metrics based on what they are good for, basically, what they can discover, what they can research, and whether they're more qualitative or quantitative. So whether they rely more on the quality of the data or the number of user or the number of data points. And you can see right here that we have interviews in the lower left corner. So this is a method that is extremely qualitative. So it's about going in depth. It's not about serving a very huge amount of users. And it's also a method that is very much, it's very much the type of method that you should use when you wanna learn about user attitudes. So during an interview, you're not gonna witness, observe behavior. What you're gonna do is you're gonna understand how user think. You're gonna understand how user form their opinion, what their opinions are, what are the attitudes. You're gonna learn more about their personal experiences, what goes through their mind, also their emotions and things like this. And you can also see from this chart that interviews are visualized with this little triangle. And we can see here that this is because they are decontextualized, meaning that there is no need to have a product during a user research or user interview session. During other type of research, you might want to have a product, whether it's a live website, a live application, or you might want to have a prototype. But with user interviews, there's no need for that. It's just really the researcher and the user. One thing that I want to mention, just as a note, as a clarification, is that user interviews are conducted with only one user at a time. So in this sense, they're different from focus groups. Maybe some of you have heard of those. Maybe you have even participated in one. Focus groups are a different method where the researcher asks multiple participants at the same time a variety of questions and listens to them and listens to also them interacting with each other. But that's not the case for the user interviews, because here what we want to do is really just have one user at the time in front of us so that we can go like really, really deep into what their problems, their pain points, their needs, etc. And this is why it's such a typical, qualitative method. And it's also very, very popular one. So if you're studying UX design, no matter if it's CareerFoundry or if you've studied elsewhere, you have probably learned about user interviews together with another couple of like very common user research methods that usually are surveys and testing, and they kind of like serve a little bit like different purposes, and they're useful in different phases of the design project. And user interviews are good for collecting rich user data quickly and relatively easily, because you don't need that much infrastructure to put together a few interviewees and the researcher. You can do that at any moment. So you can do it very early on where you still don't have a product, where you're still figuring out the problem space, actually, trying to frame what to solve with your design. They're very good to understand who the users are. So they can be used as a mean to inform persona creation. So they can be used as a way to get to know the different types of users that you have, so that you can create a picture, a portrait of all these different user types that you have or that you want to reach. They can be used, as I said before, to learn about a topic, any topic. It can be something broad. So it could be learning about the experience of taking public transport, for example. But it can also be about the experience of using an application or a type of application. So you could do a user interview about the experience of checking the weather through mobile app applications, for example. And it can be also about a service, or it can be about a process, understanding how the user goes through a process of completing certain tasks, accomplishing what they want. And they can be used, they're very often used by themselves. So a research study involving user interviews is often a research study that focuses at the moment on only that methodology, but they can also use in combination with other methodology. For example, in the past, I've also worked on projects where I combined user testing followed by brief user interviews to just give a little bit more, to make the insights basically that I got from the testing a little bit more richer and clarifying with users what I had just observed and doing. And now, before I go into how a user interview session actually looks like and how you should guide it and lead it, I want to spend a little time talking about the preparation. Because very often when we do research, and we don't get what we want out of it, is because we didn't plan it well. We weren't clear about what we were looking for. We didn't take enough time to organize everything. We didn't talk to all the team members that we had to talk with. So it makes sense to talk about how to prepare, how to plan for user interviews. And I can summarize this process in 3 steps. First of all, identifying goals, then creating a guide, and then organizing all the logistics, so the recruiting and the scheduling of people. And step 1, identifying goals, is all about like setting the goals for what you're about to do. So saying, okay, we want to do research, we want to learn about users, but what do we actually want to learn? What are the questions that we hope to give an answer to at the end? What are the things that we need to know in order to make our product or design decision? And this is something that you can do by yourself, but I would very much suggest that you involve all possible product stakeholders into this project, because as a designer or user researcher, you're working in a multidisciplinary team. And in order to define the goals for your research, you want to talk to people that work in product management. You want to talk to product owners. You want to talk also with developer, engineers, business developers, maybe also like salespeople, depending on what kind of digital product you're trying to build, what type of organization. Like people in different departments can give their inputs, can let you know what is important for them to know, and what they hope that you will get back to them at the end, so they can make their own user-centered decision in their own job. Okay, I see that somebody just wrote, when you say stakeholders, who you are referring to. So yeah, stakeholders basically are everyone who has an interest in building and developing a product. So normally in a company, in a product design organization, you have designers and researchers, but then, you know, in the larger organization, you have people working in product, you have people working in engineering, etc. And all of them, in the end, can be the product stakeholders. And yeah, by doing that, you gather all the doubts, the questions, the curiosity that people have, and then you can define some concrete goals, some concrete objectives. And I want to stress that they have to be concrete, because saying the goal of my user interviews is to learn more about users, it's a little bit too broad. So it should be something a little bit more specific. For example, let's say that you are in an insurance company. You want to say, hey, through interviews, I want to learn more about how users decide which insurance company to choose. That would be a much more concrete and useful goal to have. Then you come to step 2. You have your goals in mind, you know what you want to achieve. Then it's time to create a guide, to create something that will guide the research sessions. You can do so by defining the research question and then translate each of those into interview questions, so into prompts that you can give to a user, to an interviewee, in order to start the conversation with them. And what you're going to do, you're also going to put them into an actual document, an actual script, we usually call it, that may look a little bit like this. So you're going to have an introduction, which is basically everything that you want to remember to say when you welcome the interviewees. So things like what will happen during the session, ensure them that you will be respectful if they don't feel comfortable answering certain things, asking the consent to record the session if you want to do that. And then you're going to have the core part of the script, where you're going to have your interview questions, or the main questions, actually, those that are used just to prompt, to give an input, and to make people start telling you their stories, start telling you their opinions. And finally, you probably have a wrap up where you basically just thank the participant for their time. This is also the place where you might want to ensure then that you will treat their data in a private way. If they have any concern, any question, that's also where you want to leave some time to respond to those. And I mentioned that, yeah, like in the central part of your interview guide or interview script, you're gonna have a set of main questions. These questions should be open questions. This is not a survey. This is not a questionnaire. So you're not gonna want to ask questions that can be answered with a yes or no. You're not gonna ask questions that have a set of already defined answers. You want to ask a question that is open enough to let people tell you about them, their experience. Very good questions are questions like, tell me the last time that you did this thing. If you are trying to redesign an email client, for example, you can say, hey, can you tell me about the last time that you wrote an email? That will lead the person to tell you a concrete story that will put them in the mindset of actually doing the certain task, and that will ensure that you get like much more richer information than if you were to just ask yes or no questions. Another type of question that is usually very good to get started is, please tell me about your relationship with topic X, the topic that you're about to explore. Then, so you have your guide, you have your script ready, and now it's time to take care of the logistic. So now it's time to recruit participants and schedule the sessions. What I want to say about the recruiting is that it's important to screen for relevant characteristics. So if we go back to the example of a public transportation service or application, you might want to say, hey, the kind of user that I really want to talk to here are users that live in a city, because a user that lives in a very remote village where there are no U-Bahn, no buses, no public transport is not the type of user that you want to talk to. Yes, sometimes might make sense to also to talk to one or two of those users, because those are kind of like an extreme, and there might be people that don't often use that service but might occasionally, like come to the city and still want to access those services. So it's not like completely like never talk to them, but you do want to have a few characteristics clear that are very important for the kind of people that can give you the information that you want to get. And you want to do that while also making sure that different identities are represented. So there are core characteristics, but you still want to have a full spectrum of people to learn from. Then you have to decide how many people to interview. I would say that, like if you look at resources and if you talk to researchers, like not everybody agrees on that, but for sure, one or two people are not enough. You're gonna be totally biased if you only hear the experience and the opinion of one person. That cannot be representative of a larger group. So aim to something like 5. In many studies that I've done also a little bit more, like 5 to 10 actually, because I knew that I was going to research something a little bit more complex, so I really needed to have more variety there. But yeah, try to keep it to at least 5, I would say. Then send the invitations, letting people know what it will all be about, where you want it to take place and when, and send the reminders. Because we as researcher and designer think about research as the most important thing in the world. Interviewees might not. They might have other things to do. They might forget. And it's quite frustrating and painful when people don't show up. So do send reminders. And One last note, leave a buffer between the sessions. So if you're going to have multiple user interviews on the same day, make sure that you have some time between each session so that you have time to also clear your mind, go to the bathroom, take your note, reorganize everything, clear the space. You don't want to be stressed. You want to be very relaxed and very focused for the next interviewee that comes. I saw that somebody just said, where do you find interviewees in the chat? It depends. So it depends who you're looking for. It can be that you recruit them online, it can be that you recruit them yourself. So you reach out to people through forums to put in ads on social media, for example. You can be that if you have a mailing list, if you send out a newsletter to existing user, you can put in there a call to join as interviewees, for example. Or you can also rely on companies, agencies that do that for a job, that get your requirements and will find people for you that fit those requirements. And yeah, here I want to say something more about diversifying the pool of interviewees. As I said before, yes, you want to have some key characteristic in mind that your users may have, but you want to actively make sure that your pool of interviewees is as diverse as possible. And well, this is good for you because you're going to get more insights, but this is good also for people in general, like the public that will get access or not to your product depending on how you develop it. In my last webinar, I talked about inclusive design. I gave an introduction to what that is all about. And I also said, and I want to repeat it here for, I guess many of you didn't participate to that, inclusive design starts early on in the process. So it starts with research. It's not just about thinking about accessibility standards when you design an interface. It's very much about including people, including users, when you are trying to understand the problem, where you're in that phase of figuring out what you want to offer, what you want to design. So make sure that you have people of different gender identities, people of different ethnicity, different age, cultural, socio-economical background, different levels of physical and cognitive abilities, and really go and ask and look for those. You have to check your own bias and you have to actively reach out to those people. Otherwise, you will end up with people that look all the same, and you will just not even realize who you're forgetting about, what needs you're excluding from your whole process. Okay. Let's talk about now what actually happens during an interview. It's the fun part, at least for me. Okay, what you see in the slide in this little drawing, it is a typical setting for a user interview. So you normally have two people, one of them being the researcher, so the person that asks the question, and one of them being the interviewee, so the person that shares their experience with us. You're normally sitting facing each other, and you have your script. Very likely as a researcher, you bring that with you so that you have that as a reference. You might have a recording device. What I see in the picture is more like a phone, suggesting that you could also record video. Personally, when I do interviews, I usually ask people if it's okay with them if I record the audio only, because the audio is just enough for me to then, go back and make sure that I didn't forget, I didn't lose anything important that they said. And I prefer not to use video because besides being not so necessary for my documentation, is something that can also be a little bit off-putting. People may be a little bit concerned about their image being recorded, and they might still tell you, yes, it's fine, but they might not be so comfortable having a camera pointing at them. pointed at them during the interview. And also one thing that we don't see in the drawing, but it's totally a valid option, is to have a second person, so a second researcher or a note taker. Actually, it doesn't have to be a designer or a researcher, but somebody that is there just to listen and take a few notes. So this is not somebody that interacts. It's important in user interviews that the conversation goes on between only these two people, researcher and user. But you can have somebody there that also like takes away a little bit of pressure from you from taking notes and allows you to actually very much concentrate, listen actively, and continue guiding the conversation. While you're conducting the interview, first of all, listen. Yeah, I know that you might go in there thinking about, oh, these are all the questions that I want to ask. These are all the things that I have to remember that I have to say. And oh my God, I have to look at the time because we only have 1 hour. But please concentrate on listening instead, because it's by listening that you get to actually like figure out the interesting things that it's worth asking a few follow-up questions about. So you start with your open question. People will start telling you a story, an experience, something that happened to them, something they wish for them. And then it's time to ask follow-up question to dig deeper, to actually understand the reasons behind, understand the why, have much more richer insights in the end. And give people the time to talk. Again, like because of like time pressure, because I'm being nervous, you might be prone to like keep asking your questions. So as soon as the user pauses, you might, jump to the next question. But please like try to like just, count to 3 or maybe even to 5 in your head and give them a little bit time to pause. Because usually when people like stop talking, they're still thinking about what they just told you. They're still thinking about you asked them before. And that little bit of a pause might feel uncomfortable for you, but it's usually like not a long time at all. And that's what will then lead them to tell you something more, something even like more interesting maybe. And be respectful. Try to end the interview always in time. Your time is precious. Is precious, and the time of the people that come to you for the interview is also precious. Keep in mind that some people might struggle with being still in a closed room for a long amount of time. They might get nervous. They might get distracted as they become tired. So try to be respectful and interviewing time. Sometimes you don't get to ask all of the questions that you prepared. It's fine. You'll ask those to the next user. Because I mentioned how important are the follow-up questions, I just want to give you a few examples of good follow-up questions. So for example, asking things like, why is that important? Or how do you know this? Those are the type of question that will actually let you understand how important what you just heard is, what are the reasons why, and will ensure that you actually understand what the user is trying to tell you, and you're just not doing your own interpretation based on your own bias and your own experience. Ask for concrete examples. If people make general statements, ask them to give you an example. So if people say, I'm very frustrated when my browser is loading so slowly, I'll say, can you give me an example of one time when that happened? That is where the user can tell you, okay, like this one time I was trying to do something very important. I was trying to sign up for this webinar. It was the last minute and the browser was slow, and this meant that I did not get to participate, for example. Okay, so that is where you also understand like what's going on. You see like everything that happens that leads to certain experience, certain frustration, certain emotions, etc. And also just asking, how do you feel about that? It's a very good prompt for getting stories that are emotional stories as well. Sometimes people, especially like if they're strangers, they will, describe something in a very sort of like objective and dry way. You want to know more. You want to know how people felt in that moment. Did they feel anger? Were they glad? Were they insecure? Were they sad, disappointed? You want to hear them talk about that. Okay, let's see now, what do we do? So after the interview, we've heard a lot from users. They shared a lot with us. Now it's time to look at the analysis of what to do with all of this information. So you're gonna have notes, maybe stuff that you're written down on Post-it, you or the note taker that was with you. Maybe you have a recording, maybe you have a transcript, probably you have a combination of this, and you wanna go through them again, and you wanna isolate all the key quotes, the positive and negative things that people share with you, the emotions that were expressed, and also you want to isolate those findings that I just described as surprising findings. So basically things that maybe you weren't even looking for. So things that, sort of like just came up in the conversation, because usually there's something interesting in those. It might be that they don't necessarily tie to those goals that you had at the beginning, but maybe it's something else that you were not even able to consider at the time, and that is why it's interesting. And especially like when we do inclusive design and inclusive research, this happens a lot, because when we're trying to get to know people that are very different from us, we have so much bias that we carry that we just don't think about researching, about asking certain things. We don't think that's important because it just doesn't exist for us. But that's when in a conversation, getting to know the user, they might actually tell us something that we didn't know before. And then once you have isolated all of these bits of information, what you can do, or what you should do, is to identify different teams. So basically like find patterns. What are the things that relate to each other that users have said? So you can use something called affinity mapping, for example, which is just a way of organizing these bits of information and clustering them based on some affinity, based on some similarity. So, for example, you can end up with a theme that is all about privacy and privacy concerns. You can find a team that it's all about how users interact with friends and family when they are doing something with a digital application, or when making certain, let's say, purchase decision, for example. So you can have an overview of all the teams' topics that came up. And sometimes it might be that you realize that you have contradictory findings, that one user has said, like this experience, this product is fantastic, and one user said the complete opposite. One user may love one brand, and one user might say that brand is the devil for me. When that happens, usually it's because you're talking to people who represent different user types. So what is useful in that case is to put these answers, this information that you got from the different users on a spectrum. So you can say, okay, user A is definitely on this side of the spectrum, and these other users are maybe towards the other side, for example. And that is something that informs you about actually the personas. So it's also something that you can use to then create or refine, enrich the personas that you may have. And yeah, last thing about analyzing findings is the prioritization. So we said that user interviews are a qualitative method. So if one user said one thing and two users said another thing, I would refrain from saying, hey, because this one thing was said by two users and the other thing was said by only one, I'm gonna deem it more important than one thing that was said by two users. This is because, yes, of course, like if you keep hearing the same thing by all, 5-6 users that you have interviewed, there might be something behind that. But because the number of people that you're talking to is so small, if you make, decision based on the frequency of how often you've heard something, you're gonna make a mistake. It's just too much of a small group is not statistically valid to try and count the occurrences of something. So prioritization should be more based on how big of an impact what they just told you has on their experience. Is this something that is stopping people from continuing using a product, for example? Is it something that is preventing people from even starting to use a product? That is something that has a high impact. Also, the more emotionally charged the stories are, the more likely it is that that is something that is really stressful, or that is something that people really, really care about. So there is the place where you see, okay, here is a big pain point, or here is a huge opportunity. And also keep in mind that just like at the beginning, when you were identifying the goals of the research, also in this phase, you are not alone. So you're working with a team and you're gonna expose your findings, your insights, and also your recommendations to other people working in you. So you will have product managers, again, engineers, etc. They will also bring their perspective. And then in the end, the product development decision will be made together. Like your role is that of informing from the point of user. So what is important for them? What is the value that you want to bring to them? And other people in the team will inform that also from the business point of view, technical point of view, and so on. And therefore, the prioritization will, in the end, be balanced according to all of those needs and opportunities. Okay, I want to say something briefly about remote versus in-person interviews, and then I will leave some space for some more questions. Okay, so I've done interviews and also other types of research like usability testing, for example, both in person and remotely. That was even like before the COVID era. So I get the chance to kind of like learn the pros and cons of both. And well, I don't really have a favorite. I can only say that, in some cases, one option works better than the other. Basically, when you're in person, you have much more control of the environment. So you're in charge of setting the stage for the interview. You can have a room without distraction. You can ensure that there is the right temperature, right lighting, etc. When you do something remotely, you don't, because people are, calling from wherever they are. Maybe their office, maybe their home. Probably not outside, but that could happen as well. That can happen. So they may be very prone to distraction. They might not be focusing, etc. When you're conducting an interview in person, you also might get to have like a richer observation because, as I said, people may be more focused, so the conversation gets deeper. People may be more comfortable because there is no screen between you and them, so like the human interaction might just come more natural. People will open up more easily. Plus, you have them there, so you can also like when you're trying, especially to understand the emotions that they're recounting, you can see the person, you can see the body language. So that is a little bit of an advantage of doing things face to face. At the same time, you have a smaller pool of interviewees because, travel restrictions. It can get more expensive because, again, of travel restrictions and the higher reward that people will expect for having to come to you. And they might take more time for people to get to you, but also for you, because just to welcome and say goodbye to people that come, for example, to your office takes more time than just, starting a call at a given time and say goodbye at the right exact end time. With remote interviews, you get potentially to reach out to everyone who has an internet connection in the world. So in terms of diversity, you have a huge advantage there. Can get people living in every country, get people speaking any language, etc. It can also be more accessible to some users. So not just because of travel restriction due to geographical distance, but also people who just cannot bring themselves to your office. I don't know, these days, because of COVID, I would say that, even in countries where things are relatively under control, somebody who has health condition that puts them in the group of subject at risk, that is not someone who's going to come to an office, but you can still learn about them. You can still do research with them while they are in the comfort and safety on their own. The logistics are a little bit easier. Everything is a little bit linear. If you have to just send calendar invites and use a video call tool for doing video calls, you don't have to book a space. You don't have to have somebody to receive users while you're still working and doing an interview with someone else. Then, of course, you have the disadvantage of possible technical issues. So we see that even with webinars like this, sometimes the audio is not right, sometimes the video freezes, etc. This can be very frustrating for you as a researcher and can also hinder a little bit the quality of the interview, because people also get frustrated, you miss information, etc. And last thing is that remote research is actually also less accessible to some users. So I praise that, you get potentially to talk with much more diverse pools of interviewees, but it's also true that it can be less accessible for people who are not very tech savvy, people who are not used, who have concerns about using software, about broadcasting their image online. And there are also people who might just not have access. I mean, the fact that we say, hey, internet is everywhere now, doesn't mean that everybody has a connection, doesn't mean that everybody has the equipment needed to have video call. So depending on what kind of service, what kind of product you're building, remember that if your audience is, or if you want it to be, a larger public, also people living in different condition, different socioeconomical status, just sitting at your desk behind your computer might not be the way to reach out to them.
So I hope you enjoyed watching this webinar snippet. Let me know in the comments below what your main takeaway was and why. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have fresh videos coming out every single week. If you think you might be interested in UX and UI design, check out our free short courses. The link for that you'll find in the description. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.